The Metroid Prime 2 Echo's title is one of the most deceiving I have ever seen. Liar! Sure, it calls itself a Metroid game, starring Samus Aran, pirate hunter extraordinaire, but after playing this game for the very first time, I couldn't help but feel there should have been an elf guy with a green hat on the front box. I mean, temples, darks, and light worlds, collecting suspicious keys, this shit is basically just Space Zelda. But while they have turned up the Zelda-esque elements to 11 from the original Prime, this one really went bold and beyond to kneecap my expectations. The atmosphere of each temple is so varied, going from space horror goop to futuristic civilization. The gameplay and boss encounters are amped up on Metroid juice, and the level and world design is some of the most ambitious I have ever seen. And I think this game says a lot about how Nintendo designs their games back in the day and how the entire industry was headed in general. And I don't know about you, but I felt like this game was just way ahead of the curve in terms of world design in a 3D game, at least with console games. So today I'm getting all into the goop of Prime 2 and talking about this deceptive, lying GameCube classic and how I was just so enamored by it, despite being the follow-up to one of the most beloved games of all time. Also, if you haven't, go check out my Prime 1 remaster review, or maybe take a look at some of my other videos, maybe like this one or dislike at your own behest. I'm trying to get through all the Prime games before Metroid Prime 4 comes out next year. So if that also sounds interesting, then maybe subscribe as well. Also, there's going to be some spoilers for this game from this point onwards. So right off the bat, this game sets the mood as goopier than ever, even making the Alien movies blush a little bit. This intro makes you feel like you're in space survival horror more than any other Metroid game that I've played. You immediately crash land because Samus' ship never seems to function properly, and you get introduced to one of the main villains, Dark Samus. I love when an intro just doesn't waste your time at all, and I've always wondered what was up with Dark Samus, mostly thinking it was some sort of SAX or Mr. X-like enemy in the game, but that's not entirely the case, as it's not freely just roaming around. Maybe it would have been cool, but I'm also glad they didn't do that, so I had the time to appreciate this game's music and beautiful atmosphere, as I think that's really important for these Prime games, and to not spend half the experience just screaming your head off. In Prime 1, I had gushed about how great the game set the tone and vibe, but here, while it's different, they did an equal job with the environments and just creepy music. If you've recently played Prime 1 Remastered and you're kind of waiting for a Prime 2 Remastered, let it be known that actually playing just the original Prime 2 on an emulator or whatever, however you want to get it, is actually pretty easy to get right into it. Back to the game. While these environments are different from Prime 1, I'm actually glad they changed it a little bit for this game, as it really feels fresh and has its own identity from Prime 1. Sure, there isn't really a Phaedron Drift here, but we do get a bog, which, look, I promise this place is actually pretty cool when you start exploring it. And a lot of the levels here do make me question a lot about this world, but in a good way, and I naturally wanted to just learn more about what had happened in the past in this desolate, goopy planet. And slowly, as you are assessing the situation, you run into our little quest giver, Umos, a little moth boy on this planet. He's actually probably pretty old. I don't know. It was interesting to see another race explored in this game, although Umos himself is a moth of few words, and I stand with Umos. I would love to go get a beer with him. For here, we are also introduced to the temple structure, giving us a goal to save Umos. The game's basic structure has you going to 3 different areas, collecting upgrades, doing Metroid stuff, and looking for temple keys to shoot some energy over to our new moth buddy. It definitely gives the illusion of being a kind of linear game, but I promise you, when you're in the moment, if you haven't played this in a while, there's just so many branching paths, and the atmosphere gives you that minor level of panic, so I never felt like I was just going from point to point. There's also tons of backtracking throughout the game and connecting paths to get you from place to place even faster, and I'm just always a massive sucker for a secret door that rewards you for your extra exploration. It's also why I love games like Dark Souls and Resident Evil. There's also tons of puzzles in this game littered throughout, and I think there's definitely more than in Prime 1, and some are definitely better than others, though some puzzles are really more boss-like encounters, and the more puzzle the boss, the more I had a tendency to hate it, but we'll get into that a little bit later. But where things got really unique and drive home this point, home for me, were when we were going through the very first area and were introduced to the different beams and the concept of the light and dark worlds. This dynamic is the crux of what makes this the great Zeld Metroid game, and it's not like any game hasn't done this before or something similar like a Zelda game, but dare I say this is the most ambitious implementation of a game's level design up until this point, and it holds up tremendously well. And sure, stealing is bad, but when you steal from yourself, isn't it really just reallocation? But actually switching between the two worlds never got too confusing, and while certain areas like the Torvus Bog did irk me a little bit in the beginning and how it's designed, I still really enjoyed the ambition here. And dare I say, this was handled even better than games like Twilight Princess, a game that came out actually after this. And I know technically this game was made by Retro Studios, and I don't know all the history about it, but you can't tell me there wasn't at least a little bit of talking and inspiration back and forth between Nintendo's main studios and Retro. And the more you do spend roaming around this world, the more it just all starts to feel second nature, and you don't spend as much time spinning around your little 3D map trying to figure out where to go. You get so many cool traversal options by the end of this game. Pretty basic in the beginning of just walking around and you're trying to save our little buddies, but it gets so much more complex by the end. And I think this game did a lot better at handling traversal options and creating cool, masterful, hard 3D platforming over Prime 1. And just overall had a lot more fun exploring these worlds, gathering the dark keys than I did in Prime, where it all felt a little bit more like just the standard walking around. And later areas like the Sanctuary Temple still intrigue me even after finishing the game. And let me just gush about how dope this place's vibe is. I didn't really expect this place after going through the first couple areas, but I just have so many questions on what's going on down below. Maybe I didn't read enough of the lore bits in particular, but I have so much intrigue, and it makes me want to become a Metroid lore master. And yes, scanning is back to find those fun little lore bits, and you gotta scan everything to do that, and I think some of the messages here are left are just even better than before. But back to traversal, they even implemented the screw attack space jumping combo we usually see in the 2D games, and wall jumping. It's definitely very skill based here, and I can almost never get it right the very first time. But the other elements like grappling felt so much more intertwined in this world than before, and used much more often, especially using the morph ball. I swear this game loves the morph ball more than any other Metroid game. You can see how playing this game as a younger adult or something would have inspired someone to become a game level designer. It just has that kind of impact. Now let's of course get back to the dark world, where it is a pretty dangerous place, as the simple act of being there without a bubble for safety will start eating away at your health. Something I think most streamers could probably relate with. This is also what makes this one of the hardest Metroid games that I have ever played up until this point, which there's actually only a couple that I haven't played. The difficulty is definitely amped up here over Prime 1 without even being in the dark world, which this is probably a good time to talk a little bit more about the combat. The main gameplay of locking on, jumping, and strafing around to avoid enemies is still here. But instead of using the usual ice or plasma beam for shenanigans, we're using the dark and light beams, which is not just for opening doors. We still have our bombs and missiles too, but something that is new here is the seeker missiles. I had played Dread before, but I had no idea that something similar was actually in these games, so that was pretty cool to find out. There's also a little bit of echolocation involved in certain fights, and the switch between the different visors when bitches start disappearing. The combat isn't that different per se, but the enemies are definitely harder here across the board. Many more requiring unique ways to defeat them or hitting certain spots that are harder to lock onto. In general, this game makes Prime 1 look hella relaxing in comparison, especially with the bosses. Some of the bosses here are easily better than in Prime 1, the best of which have you squeezing your controller real damn tight. Bosses like Quadraxis force you to use so many of the game's different elements to defeat them, and the various Dark Samus encounters were also pretty solid in this game as well, although they might have overdone it a tad bit. So the Emperor Ink fight is as tough as that Benzium that only can be beat with a power bomb. Hard to time shots, and it took me a lot of tries to get this one down. I was very satisfied at the end though with the difficulty, so I'm glad I played Prime 1 so close to playing this so I could keep my mad skills primed and ready. Despite all the amazing bosses, there's a lot of duds, and the number of bosses in this game would almost make a game like Elden Ring blush. Not only does this game use a lot of morph ball action for puzzles, it also has a hard-on for turning you into a little ball and spending just an entire boss fight going armadillo mode. Fights like the Boost and Spider Ball Guardian might please some of you out there, but had me in a fit of throwing out save states for the very first time, something I actually realized I didn't do a single time in any of my playthrough. I feel more like they're just challenging you with patience rather than skill, and I wanted to go fast, dude. Maybe I need to go play a Sonic game, I don't know. And I almost cried tears of frustration when I heard that satisfying ding after beating both of these Guardians, more than even the final boss. And do not even get me started on the Power Bomb Guardian. That being said, it's really only these couple fights that were really annoying, and the rest of them I had a pretty good time with, or were kind of just easy. There are some more negative elements though in this game that I really didn't enjoy, but I think it's kind of okay because they really did shoot for the center of the fucking galaxy with this one in terms of ambition. They also didn't address a lot of the complaints I had from the very first game, which I frankly find a little insulting. I don't know how they didn't see my complaints like 12 years ago in the past when they were making this game and address them, but again, there's things like map markers that I think would have been really helpful. Samus's movement is a little bit tad slow, I think, and the final collectathon at the very end of the game is just, I can't believe we're doing this again, but alright, it feels a little bit like this is just a joke to annoy me, but you gotta find 9 hidden keys throughout the entire game after doing all 3 other temples, and they could just be anywhere, and they did this before, but I don't know, for some reason it feels even more ambiguous here. This time around you do get something like the light suit that helps you teleport around a little bit better, but I don't know, dude. You either will really like this little last romp throughout the world to get these keys, or you're just gonna be absolutely sick of it. This is also where, despite trying not to use a guide, I had to pull out a guide for the last couple of ones that I couldn't find. It was just getting really annoying, and I just kind of wanted to get to the final sequence in the game. Despite some of these negatives though, it really didn't impact like my actual feelings on the game. It just means it's not like the absolute peak of perfection in my eyes. And I wanted to go back to that first sentence. I prompted up about this being a Zelda game. I know I'm maybe joking around and hamming it up a little bit, but I think there is something to be said about how Nintendo in this era of games was just designing and sharing with each other. And despite saying it's lying or it's deceiving you and stealing or whatever, I think that's really the crux of what's so special about this game, is just how they were sharing and mix matching ideas. It's so cool to how you can see Zelda and Metroid specifically mix match their ideas, and it's something that I think is just pretty beautiful about this era of video games, and it's so emblematic of this time in gaming and Nintendo history in general, and how they just shared to make everything just better. This does make the game a little bit of a flawed masterpiece, as a usual game journalist would have you believe, but there is just something so ambitious and fun about this game, and I really enjoyed my time with it. There's also just something fun about hearing people complain about other games coming out right now. A lot of what I talked in my last video about games being too expensive, here I am having the best time of my life playing Prime 2, an old ass GameCube game. I'm also glad I didn't play this game when I was like an 8-year-old, because I don't think I would have really been able to appreciate it as much as I have now. That all being said, I can't wait to try out Prime 3. I've heard it's a little bit more than the other two, but I'm still looking forward to it. And of course, this is all going to lead up to playing Metroid Prime 4 Beyond later, hopefully next year. Anyways, have a good one.